Hey everybody, this is me ramankrithik. Welcome to my channel. If you're new, please go and subscribe. So in this video, we are going to see about one of the most unanswered, unsolved mysteries of all time. The question which was asked again and again from since this event happened. So the question is, who was Jack the Ripper? One of the most notorious unsolved crime spears in the history goes to Jack the Ripper, the identity of a killer who terrified East London in 1888 remains mystery to this day. The killer used to mutilate his victim's body in such an unusual manner, indicating that he had a substantial knowledge to human anatomy. Many have speculated on who exactly the killer of five women in Whitechapel area of East London was, but none has been able to solve this mystery, probably never will. However, many new convincing theories have been put forth for this infamous case since the late 19th century, even today. Though, in the end, the lineal question will still remain, who was Jack the Ripper? So, if you knew, comment me down below, and thanks for coming till here. So, we are going to see about this in a detailed manner in this video. So, stay tuned, subscribe, and I have made a playlist of all mystery videos. Please go and watch. So, the Ripper murders occurred in London in 1888, primarily in the poor community of Whitechapel. One of the murders crossed the boundary into the city, the business district of London. The Ripper victims were Mary and Polly Nicholas, murdered on 31st August 1888, Annie Chapman, murdered on 8th September 1888, Elizabeth Stride, murdered on 30th September, and Catherine Eddowes, murdered on 30th September 1888, and Mary Jane Kelly, murdered on 9th November 1888. Most of the victims were prostitutes whose throats have been cut, but unlike the other victims, Mary Jane Kelly was killed indoors safely, away from any prying eyes, and thus the mutilations to her body were considerably more severe than others. The single victim who escaped mutilation was Elizabeth Stride, and most critics believe that in this case the murderer was interrupted in the midst of the crime. The murders all happened at night on densely populated streets, and while four of them took place out in the open, no witnesses saw the killer well enough to identify him or offer a detailed description. Also, there were nobody. There was no clear motive for the crimes, and the murderer was never brought to justice. Many writers discussing that crime in the 19th century and today have claimed that the murderer was sexually deviant, particularly since all the murders were enacted on prostitutes and much of physical mutilation focused on abdomen. The murder of mutilation of prostitutes cut almost straight to the heart of Victorian morbidity, causing a wave of panic in London. This was exacerbated by a series of taunting letters to the Central News Agency and the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee between the double event on 30th September and Mary Kelly's death on 9th November 1888. One of these letters, known as From Hell, purported to include half of Catherine Eddowes' missing kidney. It was said like, to their half I fried and ate. It was very nice. All except this one are now usually considered to be hoaxes perpetrated by the reporters themselves, including one in which the Ripper received his famous name. At that time, over thousands letter had been investigated by police, and the most infamous of them are Dear Boss letter, Saucy Jack postcard, and From Hell letter, and Open Shaw letter. Besides these communications, the only clue the killer left behind was found on the night of the double event, consisting of some bloody pieces of Edo's apron found in alleyway. It is theorized that they were thrown there after the murderer used them to wipe his hands. A chalk inscription above the apron pieces, the Jewish, presumably Jews, are the men who will not be blamed for nothing, was also assumed to have been written by the killer for reasons unknown. However, the inscription was cleaned away before it could be properly recorded due to fears that it would incite the populace, and given the general anti Semitism of the times, it cannot be definitively established whether the phrase refers specifically to Ripper murders. Things became even more complicated when the killings probably stopped after Mary Kelly's death and the case went more or less cold. Although, as noted, a few similar murders briefly revived fears for some years thereafter. It was and is widely believed that the killer's growing psychosis reached full expression with the Kelly's murder, after which he either committed suicide, died naturally, or committed for other reasons. So, various extraordinary claims ranging from a homeless Jewish butcher to various middle class medical students to the heir to the British Empire have been put forth for the Riper suspect. The theory that the killer was a woman, a vengeful midwife dressed as a man, has also been bandied about from time to time. Another popular notion has it that the killer had been infected by syphilis, a venereal disease that causes progressive brain damage in its last stages, and out for revenge. Another theory conveys that the five victims were bound by the knowledge of highly sensitive secret harbored by one, probably Kelly, and the killed by mysterious government agents to keep them from talking. And a wealthy cotton merchant by the name of James Maybrick was also thought by some to have been Jack the Ripper. Maybrick was actually murdered himself by his wife, who used arsenic to kill him. In 1890s, a diary published, said to be written by Maybrick, confessed to the Riper murders, but the author subsequently admitted that he had forged the diary. Another controversial new theory, advanced by crime writer Patricia Cornwell, features the famous British painter Walter Richard Sykert, whose works show a distinct fascination with low Victorian life, as either directly responsible for the killings or aiding in the royal cover up. Walter Sickert was a member for the Camden Town group of post impressionist artists in early 20th century London. Cornwell's theory is almost universally mocked by serious ripperologists as a case of deciding the culprit before examining the evidence. Was Jack the Ripper an American? Who knows? There have been many theories over last 130 years which have attempted to uncover the secret identity of Jack the Ripper, but one of the most popular suggests that the killer could have been one of the many traveling Americans who came to London during the late 1880s. This theory actually existed at the time of murders, and the following three men are just some of the Americans suspected of being Jack the Ripper. And the Richard Mansfield. Mansfield was an American actor born on May 24th, 1857. In 1887, Mansfield embarked on his most famous portrayal of a character by playing the lead role in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In August 1888, Mansfield brought his new play to London and set up in the famous Lichen Theatre in the West End. His performance was a hit, and it was stated that his transformation into the monster, Mr. Hyde, was so convincing that women in the audience fainted and grown men were scared to go home alone. By a strange coincidence, the opening of the play coincided with the start of the Jack the Ripper murders. A couple of days after the first show, on 7th August 1888, the body of Martha Tabram was discovered in George Yard Buildings, Whitechapel. Martha may have been the first victim of the still unidentified Whitechapel Ripper. Although not one of the canonical five Ripper victims, she is considered next most likely candidate. As the investigation unfolded, the police and the public came to the conclusion that the killer must be a man who appeared perfectly normal during the day but mentally turned into a monster at night. The fact that the Ripper was also removing body parts from his victims suggested the work of a doctor, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and the elusive Jack the Ripper. And it wasn't long before a finger of suspicion was pointed at one man who fitted this character perfectly. That's Richard Mansfield. However, it was never proved that he was the real killer. And the next person to be suspected is Dr. Francis J. Tumblety. Another infamous American suspect was Dr. Francis J. He was a quack doctor from New York who made his money selling dodgy Indian herbal remedies and tonics. He was a habitual liar with an obsessive sense of self importance. It was reported that he had a deep hatred of women, especially prostitutes, and his movement could never be ascertained. His arrival into London from the States heralded the start of Whitechapel murders, and he was arrested for acts of gross indecency and was almost certainly a suspect during the Ripper murders. Shortly after the Jack the Ripper's final murder, November 1888, Tumblety fled the country and moved back to America, and no one could trace him again. And the next is H.H. Holmes. So, in recent years, an American serial killer was called H.H. Holmes, has been put in the frame as a likely candidate to be Jack the Ripper. Dr. Henry Howard Holmes is regarded as America's first ever serial killer after he confessed to murdering over 27 in his infamous Illinois hotel in the late 19th century. Holmes' technique was to turn his hotel into murder castle, which was full of bloody traps and torture devices where he could skin and dissect his victims. Although Holmes and Jack the Ripper appeared to be very different kinds of killers, both were cold and calculating, almost methodical in their approach. There is also a similarity in the victims. The final Jack the Ripper victim, Mary Kelly, was murdered and mutilated not in the streets but in her own home. This does show a very clear escalation in the Ripper's motive. He had turned from the serial killer into a man who took his victims' closed door. If H.H. Holmes was the Ripper, the murder of Mary Kelly may have inspired him to take the next step and create his murder castle in Chicago, where he could continue his gruesome work uninterrupted. In 2018, the great grandson of Holmes uncovered the circumstantial evidence which could link his relative to the Jack the Ripper letters, and it's possible that Holmes may have been in London at the right time to be Whitechapel Ripper. If this is true, then puts Holmes in a likely position to be Jack the Ripper. Then one of the main question was Jack the Ripper a slaughterman? Like many theories, this is also one of them in which concerning the identity of Jack the Ripper, his propensity of anatomical dissection with a knife, and in a particular the rapid location and removal of specific organ led some to speculate that he must have been surgically trained. However, a re-examination of a mortuary sketch of one of his victims has revealed several aspects of incisional technique highly irrational with professionals' surgical training, and related discrepancies are also apparent in the language used within the only letter from the Jack considered to be probably authentic. The techniques he used to dispatch his victims and retrieve their organ were, however, highly consistent with techniques used within the slaughterhouses of the day. East London in 1880s had a large number of small-scale slaughterhouses within which conditions for both animals and workers were exceedingly harsh. Modern sociology research has been highlighted the clear links between infliction of violence on animals and that infliction on humans, as well as increased risk of violent crimes in communities surrounding slaughterhouses. So the theory can be denied at all that Jack the Ripper could have been a slaughterman. Many believe that he was a Jewish slaughterman who resided in that area of murders. And was there any connection between the Whitechapel Ripper and the Lambeth poisoner? Dr. Thomas Neil Cream was also known as Lambeth Poisoner, was a Scottish Canadian serial killer who poisoned his victims to their deaths. Dr. Cream claimed his proven victims in the United States and the rest in Great Britain, and possibly others in Canada. During the execution by the hanging on November 15th, 1892, his enigmatic last words were, "I am Jack the." Therefore, speculation escalated. The Lambeth poisoner was the real Jack the Ripper. However, official records state that he was in prison in Illinois at the time of Ripper murders, and there is also a theory that states Jack the Ripper was a Polish barber. A group of British researchers have been suggested that the notorious serial killer Jack the Ripper could be 23-year-old Polish barber named Aaron Kosminski, who was committed to an asylum at the same time the killings stopped. The researchers used high-tech DNA tests to link Polish-born Aaron Kominski and a blood-stained shawl of Ripper victim. They claim it is a statistical ability. Kosminski cold-bloodedly butchered at least 5 women in Whitechapel area. And the conclusion: more than 130 years have been passed since Whitechapel serial killings happened in England in late 19th century. During this long period, crime investigations have evolved from handwritings to footprints to fingerprints to DNA tests and have reached to its height. However, so many speculations and theories about Jack the Ripper have pushed this case into an endless pit. Perhaps the case will never get its ground and identity, of Jack the Ripper will remain unsolved mystery forever. So, guys, that's it for today. Like, share, and subscribe, and comment me down below who might be the Jack the Ripper from the list I have mentioned. If you have something interesting like this, please do tell. And I'm looking for some Indianized serial killers. So, hope I will release these videos, and I have made a playlist as I said already. Please do watch.